ahead, slowing down and making no time. I gotta keep it rolling. Those windshield wipers snapping out the tempo, playing perfect rhythm with the song on the radio. I gotta keep it rolling.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Rideshare Rodeo weekly podcast. Glad to have you all with me. And one thing I was trying to figure out, if you're listening on a if you're listening to the podcast through a pod player, other than like I know there's a lot, but other than one you think that I've heard of most of them kind of thing. So like any of the obvious staples, the first 20, the main other ones, I could name them off here, but like those I'm all familiar with. But if you think you're listening on something really, really like random pod player and you didn't have to manually enter the RSS feed, please let me know. You can email me, steve@ridesharerodeo.com, and let me know either what country, what state, where you are and which podcast player it is, because I would love to give the little guys a shout out. And I'm sure some of you out there are listening on pod players I've never even heard of. There's so many that are fed from either Apple or my RSS feed that I've manually submitted. So thank you all for listening. It keeps growing and growing and growing. And thank you to all the supporters who have been here for years and stuff. So this week is supposed to be, I'm sorry, excuse me about my voice, guys. We talked last week 2 times on the roundtable, and then again on 13 Minutes of News over on YouTube, and the roundtable, which drops here on Fridays on audio. If you heard the Friday drop, you guys were aware that I was talking about the Colorado laws that have changed, the 2. And we are supposed to have Stephanie Vigil. So we were supposed to have Stephanie Vigil this week, but had a scheduling conflict, pushed it till as late as I could, and then I had to record for tomorrow. But we had a scheduling conflict. Next week, she will be the guest on the podcast. So we've just rescheduled it, and it's actually going to be much easier for both of us this way. So she will be next week's guest. So tune in for that, but don't let that throw you. We got a lot to cover this week outside of that. And hopefully at the end of this, we will have a few minutes at the end of this podcast where I can bullet point what happened last week in Colorado regarding the 2 gig worker laws, just to kind of refresh you guys, get you ready for next week. Because next week the whole episode will just be Stephanie and I talking about it. I already have some questions on specific things that obviously I want to make sure are not union oriented, or, and at the same time, it's not a pay change, just to give you a hint, and hopefully we'll have a little time here at the end. But in this state, which is what I love, it's just about transparency. And that's, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, that's my big thing. Look, if you're transparent and you don't have an AR, I really can't get mad at you. If you're an app and you offer everybody 1 penny to do jobs, you show all the transparency and there's no acceptance rate, I can't get mad at it. I'm not going to take them, but I need to know that that's not at all reflective bad on me for not taking an offer, no matter what it is. I'm an independent contractor. We say this a lot, but understanding it is very important. Speaking of which, you guys make sure to, even you audio podcast people, yes, you, make sure to check out Kim's Side Money Plans. She's got an audio podcast. Check out the Gig Economy podcast. They've had a podcast for quite some time, as well as it's only on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Red Circle, and a couple other small ones. But we're building it out, which is Mike Harubi and my new project, which is Be My Own Boss podcast. I'm trying to kind of put Mike in charge of that project. I'm just really doing a lot of the back end work and, helping him in every way I can. Mike and I do a lot of stuff together, and I would like to see that build out a lot. So if you guys are audio podcast listeners, make sure to look that up. I'll also put it in the show notes, and I believe I did last week too. But yeah, I talk about a different subject every Monday. It's a 25-minute podcast. It actually has a stop time. So, all right, let's see how much we can get through, and if we can get a little bit of the breakdown from like a quick catch up to get you prepared for next week. So first of all, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 stories, 2 extremely important. I mean, they're all important, but let's make sure we get through these first. So, okay, this is a big one. And I'm going to try and do my best to help you guys understand, because none of these, like, it depends on where you see it. And a lot of times where I read it, I think I've shared this with the audio podcast people many times before, that, before it goes up on my website, I look at when I find an article that I'm interested in, before I re-aggregate it or before I break it down or do my article or whatever, I'm like, ooh, that's a good story. I try and find that story's title, and I Google search it and try and find all the related stories. And I know which publications I like for which reasons, which I don't agree with, but I like to read because their view can be important to understanding the whole thing. So I see what comes up in the results, and I always look at 3 or 4 before I share one with you. So the one I share with you guys is always the one I think gives the best perspective. And this one on AB5 is a little confusing, and Reuters did the best job with it, I think, which is sometimes the case. A lot of times there's other places that write a little better, but they're definitely always the first ones to get out. But even the information in it's pretty good on this one. So we are now talking about Proposition 22 in California. Okay, those people and everybody, really, a lot of people in the country and stuff know about Prop 22, but still to this day, when I say, if I get into the conversation with people, I'm like, so Prop 22 is, and they're like, it's a stipend for working gig apps in California. And it's not. It's an exemption to a law that they passed that actually ended like close to 2 million careers. And many of the people I've had here on the podcast, many of them, freelance writers, and it took carve outs. It was this big nasty thing where, like, obviously everybody who couldn't pass this California ABC test, and the California ABC test is to determine if you can be an independent contractor or not. The B prong of the test, without going too far down the rabbit hole, you guys can Google it if you want to see, just put California ABC test and just see what the 3 questions are. And if you're an independent contractor, just no matter what, even if you're not in California, just read those 3 questions and think to yourself, would you pass that test? Because it's almost impossible to pass. The B prong is the one that gets you. But basically start giving exemptions, whether you pass the B prong or not. Like, first people that probably got exemptions, we know that, I mean, they did, but they were probably even first. Lawyers. All independent contractor lawyers were exempt because they were going to sue the state. Doctors, especially specialty niche doctors. So it's so weird because there's all these weird groups, and this didn't get a carve out and this didn't and this didn't. And if you actually follow it down, it's like how it was like a divide to conquer the problem in California. Like, they wanted to come in and give the exemptions to the largest groups making the most noise. It really wasn't about that group should have an exemption even though they can't pass the B prong because we feel this, and that. It was like, that group has 50,000. I'm just using small arbitrary numbers. That group has 50,000 people yelling and screaming about not being able to pass the ABC test. The next size group down is 20,000. They would just be like, well, the 50 gets an exemption. Done. It actually started in a weird way. The biggest, loudest people got exemptions, leaving a lot of people behind and breaking up a lot of groups that were protesting this. And I mean protesting in a way because, again, AB5 went into effect when? January 1st of 2020. It was put into law in September of 2019 with Gavin Newsom and Lorena Gonzalez, who at the time was, I'm not really sure why it was just her, because she was still down in San Diego, but for whatever reason, it was only a very small group of people that made this happen. But anyway, there's been a few court cases going on around this, and so it confuses a lot of people. So people have said, well, isn't Prop 22 being challenged? And I say, what do you know what Prop 22 is? And this is where we get into they're not even familiar with AB5. So what happened was AB5 went into law, and it was supposed to get the gig economy, the gig apps. And it came down to like the wire. It was the end of January. They were supposed to, the gig apps were supposed to start paying Prop 22 money, or start paying AB5 and calling everybody employees and not independent contractors as of midnight on January 31st, 2000. Now we're 2 months still from the pandemic at this point. We don't even really know it, but Uber and Lyft were the loudest, and they instantly said, listen, we'll leave the state. And I don't know if you guys know that story, but it actually came down to like, I don't know if it was 11:59, but it was after 11:50. It was like 11:55, 11:57 p.m. And the state bowed down to Uber and Lyft and said, okay, you can stay. The only reason they allowed them to stay and not be under the law AB5, where every driver would have needed to be an employee, because they wouldn't have passed the ABC test. The only reason they allowed that, though, was because Proposition 22 was put forward. Now it's end of January 2020. The elections were not until November of 2020. So basically Uber and Lyft said, hey, we're going to let the voters decide. And in November, and until then, we're not going to participate in this. And there became a deal of, well, if you lose the November ballot and everybody votes no on Prop 22, then meaning that all the drivers would have had to become employees. There's a lot more to it too, but that's the basic thing they'd be voting on, that they would have to pay the back dues going back to this date. And they were like, fine with that. So Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, everybody, they formed what was known and still is around called the Flex Association. And they actually it was like the most money ever put to a California proposition between all the companies, excuse me, the ride shares and those. They put together $208 million for this one proposition, Prop 22. Now, California would be a state to not vote usually with these corporation size things. And normally it would be a vote against their proposal. You know what I'm saying? Especially that state. And so, but it was billed in so many different ways. Anyway, November comes around and Prop 22 gets on the ballot. Prop 22, yes or no? No. A no vote would have meant everybody needs to become an employee or franchise models need to be implemented. But a yes vote meant they can stay independent contractors with some exemptions, that they'd have a right to get some kind of medical deal, which really ended up being about the same cost as Obamacare with a few exceptions. So like a lot of it was just kind of, just kind of like, okay, we'll do that. Really not the best way, but the main thing was that it was before all of the other states even tried this, that you would get 120% of minimum wage. Minimum wage in California varies from $16 an hour to $19 and I think it's 88 cents in San Francisco. So we'll call it 20. So $16 to $20. And then wherever you were, if you're in San Francisco, you'd get 120% of the $20 an hour. So you would need to get $24 an hour for every active hour. And remember, this is before all the other states tried it. So it wins the vote, 59%, won by 3.1 million votes in a state where you wouldn't have thought it would have gone. Everybody voted with the gig companies. So since then, it's had constitutional challenges because one of the deals they agreed to was no forming unions, no this, no that. They had to give up some freedoms to be able to get this Prop 22 money. And it was really supposed to benefit rideshare drivers because January 2020, the food platforms weren't really even doing that well. I mean, it was March 28th or 29th when the CARES Act went into effect. That was the moment in which the food delivery apps were given birth. I mean, they were around before, but most people I knew were doing their best on Grubhub, the transparent one, and it was only in bigger cities. It really wasn't. The food delivery wasn't booming yet. It was literally the day that the CARES Act went into effect and pandemic checks would be going out and people were put on stay-at-home orders. For the first time ever in my lifetime, anyway, anything like near that has happened. So obviously people moved to ordering food. Its height increased around the 21 era. You know, I mean, now they've got to the point where, unlike how Rideshare did it, they're actually like trying to jack the prices on everybody, restaurants, customers, take away from drivers. So this is a very different game, but this was challenged because of the clause in 22 that said you don't have the right to organize. So that has been that was challenged by a group who didn't like that it passed. You know, a lot of these rideshare union groups and things like that in California, they don't like Prop 22, but then there's a lot of people who do. I think Prop 22 is great for some of the delivery drivers. I don't like the way that it came into play, though. But nonetheless, it's been challenged for its constitutional value because it broke the California Constitution by allowing something to say that people can't have the right to organize. But then at the same time, they had already let the entire state vote, and 59% of the state voted to allow this. So it's been very confusing. But Uber, so there's been a big challenge about the California gig work law, and it's been in the appeals court, and Uber has been trying for a while. Well, today, a U.S. appeals court on Monday, June 10th, rejected a bid by Uber and subsidiary Postmates to receive a challenge to a California law that could force the companies to treat drivers as employees rather than independent contractors who are typically less expensive. An 11-judge panel of the 9th U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals in San Francisco upheld a lower court ruling that said Uber failed to show that the 2020 state law known as AB 5 unfairly singled out app-based transportation companies while exempting other industries. Uber, in a statement on Monday, said the ruling would not change the status of its relationship with the drivers, who are considered to be contractors under the 2020 ballot initiative known as Prop 22. So here I'll take a quick pause and I'll say, okay, so this is a court ruling coming down saying that, yeah, we're going to stick with the California law. And the Ninth Circuit, if you guys look it up, is notorious for kind of siding hard left. So they said, yeah, we're going to stick with the California law. You know, I'm not sure that you should be exempt. And they're kind of like playing around with this. So Uber's saying, like normal, like, well, it was kind of like, no matter what you do with that, we're not going to follow it. Like, we'll operate here as long as we can do it our way. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So the fate of Prop 22 is being weighed in a separate case. This is why it gets confusing, at the state's top court, which last month heard arguments from a labor union and 4 drivers contending the ballot measure was unconstitutional. So, but here's my thing, and I've said this many times. Even if it is, let's say it is unconstitutional, why was it not taken care of between January and November of 2020 when they knew that what it was? I mean, they didn't wait to put it out. They put the proposal out like February 2nd, Prop 22 in California, billboards up everywhere. So why were there not lawyers on the Uber side, and more so even on the state side, who would have already captured this and said, you know what, that's unconstitutional. We can't allow that language. Because by allowing it, now you've allowed the entire state to vote. Now what are you going to do? Go back and take it back? That's going to be a whole problem of its own. But a representative for the California Attorney General's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The Ninth Circuit, in its ruling, said, this is a quote, there are plausible reasons for treating transportation and delivery referral companies differently from other types of referral companies. The California legislator was quoted, perceived transportation and delivery companies as the most significant perpetrators of the problem is sought to address worker misclassification. So that's the California legislator saying that, look, these guys totally took advantage of something and kind of slipped by this labor law. Again, you guys are going to have to tell me in the notes, tell me wherever the pod player you listen to, email, whatever you want to do. I'm interested in what you guys think, wherever you're watching this, because I want to know what you guys think about this, because it's already been voted on. So I really believe that we need to be able to vote how this country is run. To go in after the fact and go, you know what, we found it. I mean, most California people are going to say the same thing I did. Why didn't you find it in that 8 months before before it was on a ballot and we voted? So I don't know. It's going to be a lot of problems, but things are getting very sticky here. So, employees are entitled to the minimum wage, overtime, reimbursements for expenses, and other protections that are not extended to independent contractors. Uber, Postmates, and similar services typically treat workers as contractors in order to control costs. That's pretty much saying what we already know about the PRO Act and other things that have tried to be passed. Like, listen, everybody needs to be in a union. You need to be W-2. But the clash over the scope of AB5 comes amid a broader national debate over state and federal laws and other regulations that could require more companies to deem their workers as employees. Now they're referring to the Fair Labor Standards Act and the acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, putting Biden's new employment part in there about independent contractors, which, again, it's a 6-prong test. It's almost harder. So it allows, this is what gets very concerning to me, because if you're really reading into all these, it's very easy to do and make sense of it. They're putting things into place so that states can make decisions based off of federal law that shouldn't exist in the first place and shouldn't have been able to be ratified by a acting Secretary of Labor that they 3 times now cannot get nominated even by their own party. Something's wrong with this woman. I've talked about it on elder episodes, so go back, find Julie Su episodes. I'm not going to dog her today. It's not worth the time. Okay. So U.S. business groups in March sued the Biden administration. This is for the federal law change that happened under Julie Su. Sued the Biden administration in a federal court over its effort to make it harder for companies to treat workers as independent contractors rather than employees. Studies suggest that employees can cost companies up to 30% more than contract workers. Yeah, but we won't get into the whole contractor thing, but we have the right to be independent contractors and do as we wish, as long as it's within the scope of the law, which they're trying to tweak out everywhere. So the top state court in Massachusetts is weighing whether voters in November should get a chance to consider ballot proposals that would redefine the working relationships between on-demand drivers and their companies in the state. California's AB5 raised the bar for proving that workers are truly independent for proving that workers are truly independent contractors, requiring a company to show that workers are not under its direct control or engaged in its usual course of business and operate their own independent businesses. See, that's the ABC test right there. Engaged in its usual course of business. I mean, you have to go read it, and every state kind of has an ABC test. So you guys go check those out, because if you're not familiar with it, that B prong will kill any of you that have been self-employed, freelancers, writers, independent contractors, whatever you want to call it, business owners, sole proprietorships, gig workers. We are independent contractors, whether you like it or not or fully understand it. This is all happening to us. And I know I've talked to enough of you where none of you, literally none of you, want to be W-2 employees for this company or for any of these gig companies. I don't either. In fact, I do a lot of production work and other things like that. So I need the flex. I am my own boss. And that's why we have the podcast, Be My Own Boss podcast. Check it out. But yeah, let me know what you think about the AB5 thing. I'm very concerned by it. I think it's ridiculous. And I think it's I do think it's very scary too, to be honest. But yeah, so let me pull up this article. Okay. So we know that Minnesota's new Uber and Lyft law just cements their duopoly in place. This is from the Minnesota Reporter or Reformer from today. So let me see. Okay, skip through a little bit of this, but here's what we know so far, right? We know that it was May 1st that their new per mile per minute rate was going to go into effect in Minnesota. And then Uber and Lyft said we'll leave the state. They pushed it to July 1st, and right before the session ended for city council for Minneapolis, they did come to an agreement, and I thought it wasn't going to be able to be done, but they did. It needed to come down from their amount, and Uber met them somewhere along the way. But Uber made a quote saying, hey, all it's going to mean is less customers getting the service and less offers for drivers. That's all it's going to mean. But they came to a number where they said, we can make it work at this. Again, for those people thinking, well, what? Because maybe it will work. I mean, you can always bet at 500 to 1 on things, you know what I mean? But I'm saying that because we've seen this play out. Austin, Texas did this. And when Austin did it, there were 3 startup rideshare companies that weren't starting up because of it happening. They were already in the process of starting up and doing okay. Once Uber and Lyft left for a year out of Austin, all 3 of those companies couldn't maintain. It didn't do anything of the effect they thought. There weren't enough rides for them to keep up with it. And without the giants around, people didn't even want to use the other services. So they left, and now Uber and Lyft are back there, and it was the city begging them back. But here we go. So it's been a 2-year journey trying to get this across. So the new ride hail drivers bill in Minnesota is called HF 4746. So in 2023, Governor Tim Walz used his first veto ever to veto what the city council had passed, which were the amounts that they set forth this year. And subsequently, again, brought back the same idea again this year. So here's it. Let's take a look into the bill itself a little bit, because this is a good portion of this that you guys should hear. Minnesotans shouldn't be happy with the new law, least of all the drivers, as the legislator has all but cemented an Uber Lyft duopoly and increased costs for ridership. See, again, that duopoly that's going to be a problem. And yes, there are companies like Move and some others, but they're all going to be startups that have not been operational in the state. They're all going to have to be startups, and that's going to be even harder now. So anyway, yes, drivers will be seeing a 14% raise in their take-home pay over 2022 levels. That sounds good, right? Not great, but good. Yes, drivers have a right to appeal being fired or deactivated. And yes, drivers can now keep 80% of a canceled ride. I believe a canceled ride is what, $5. So if somebody cancels a ride, you get $4. I mean, it's something, but that's not big. Although these are fantastic, hard-fought developments leading to a great many positive results in the short term, in the long term, the winners are once again Uber and Lyft. And the drivers will be right back where they were when all of this started. A handful of innovative technology startups and entrepreneurs pulled out all the stops to offer solutions to Uber and Lyft's extortive threats to leave Minnesota. We keep saying, dude, if you threaten them, they'll leave. They did it in Austin. They were threatening California and didn't. I'm not on the side of them, but it's a proven fact. I guess what I'm saying is, these states and things need to stop putting these dates out as threats. Uber said, and they've done it in other countries too, they're very used to it. We'll leave. If they say that, they will leave. They will. So a handful, blah, blah, blah. Governor Walz may have been dismissive of Minnesotan entrepreneurial solutions, but problem solvers built, tested, and validated alternatives. These alternatives, like rides, spelled with a WWRIDZ, are providing real rides today. But the new law includes a series of anti-competitive mechanisms that will disadvantage any new competitor against its incumbents. So what had happened was, and there still would have been this though, but now they've made the application annual and it's more expensive. They've made these different charges, which Uber and Lyft can say, yeah, no problem, but it makes it much harder for the companies like Rides or Move, MOOV, who have already gone there and set up shop and are ready to roll, because now they're under all this too. So the application fees for ride hail companies are the biggest unaddressed issue that cements an anti-competitive market in place. Any Uber competitor entering the market first has to hand over nearly $100,000 in annual licensing fees to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the metro airports. For context, Washington's Democratic trifecta set their statewide license fee to $5,000 with a 18 cents a ride surcharge, which they line item. So 100,000, the state of Washington, 5,000 a year, the state of Minnesota, 100,000 a year. And Texas, in response to Austin's ride hail weight ordinance, moved their administrative fee to a flat $10,500 charge. The Minnesota bill removed cities' abilities to set wages, enforce those wage rates, and to collect data about ride hail operations in their jurisdiction. Cities can arbitrarily raise licensing fees due to statutory limits, but given that it's only level of power they have, it's the only level of power they have, one could imagine a creative city council implementing environmental, health, and safety studies to justify which higher surcharges for ride hail companies. Uber and Lyft would be unaffected as these costs are absorbable at their scale. I mean, they are, but let's be honest, guys. It's not because they're jamming in Minneapolis. They're not going to pay it off by being in Minneapolis, which is what the other companies would need to do. I mean, Uber, let's take, for example, they're worldwide. They're in all over the world. So they can offset any kind of market loss. So that it still would be a market loss. Let's be clear. The aspects of the bill is fundamentally anti-competitive for new entrants who don't have billions of dollars backing them alongside their best lobbyists. Yeah, it keeps going on. If you guys aren't getting let me see. Lastly, okay, so let's do that. The bill didn't advance Minnesota's ordinance language requiring ride hail. So this did not happen. Requiring ride hail companies to pay 80% of special event or surge pricing. And drivers know very well that platform fees and external fees eat deeply into their existing take rate. Some drivers have publicly posted earnings of $13 on a $55 Lyft ride. We all know this happens. It's not pretty. It's not okay. As only 28% of riders ever tip, that's an issue that needs to be kind of readdressed, because these gig apps started by not introducing tips. And even the original Uber platform, Travis Kalanick, he was absolutely like, look, let's just give them the price. Let's make it known. And at the time he paid the drivers so well during his era. So it was like, well, the drivers are well taken care of, so I'm not concerned about a tip type thing. But we're at a totally different stage now, and it's a problem that's already been created. So as only 28% of riders tip, and gross Uber wages are overall down 17% since 2022. Yikes. It would be no surprise if drivers saw even less earnings after the implementation of this bill. the reason for that, again, guys, is because they're going to pass, just like they did in Seattle, they're going to pass on surcharges for Minnesota operational costs, $5 per ride. The things that are happening that are destroying the food apps up in Seattle right now, and the pay up legislation that they're trying to just get rid of. The restaurants want it gone, the customers want it gone, the drivers want it gone, and the city council who passed it is trying to get rid of it. So you got to, I mean, this is what happens when you just, I don't know. I've seen this so many times. I feel like we keep talking about a bad idea tweaked out a little bit to see if it'll work better. And it just, I don't know. But so it's really odd that Minneapolis did this. It's really odd that they took out some of that language, because that was the basis of what they were going to call a win. I'm not seeing how it really is a win. So let's run through one last thing of it. The legislators' ride hail bill is anti-competitive. It increases the costs for new competitors and for riders, and raises the barrier of entry for competitors, while not readjusting the regulatory fee to compete against Uber and Lyft. It removes the ability for drivers to influence their city councils to secure higher wages again. It introduces potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of undefined and extortive costs to be compliant with nameless drivers' advocacy organizations. We know what that is. While disallowing those organizations to once again coordinate with competitors to provide an alternative for Uber and Lyft. So politicians can now advertise this as a legislative victory, a promise kept after 2 years of work in their noble quest to secure a better outcome for low-wage workers. The DFL have instead given a handout to corporations and further cemented a tech giant duopoly in Minnesota. What do you guys all think? Think that's about right? I'm going to tell you what I think, because most of you know me, and I think you would know how I would feel about this. Okay, let's see. I guess the two things. So, okay, we were talking about the mopeds and scooter issues on the East Coast. There's more and more cities, and we'll try and do a piece on that maybe this week. But there's more and more cities now doing this. They're trying to get these off the street, get this done. It's going to help in so many different ways. Another thing that happened at the end of last week, and I just wanted to mention it, I wanted to put it into the timeline. We don't need to get into the story, and then we'll have a little time to talk about one last thing, including the Colorado bullet points, to leave you guys in a good place for next week. If you're familiar with the rideshare company Revel, Revel, they were a company that paid drivers for their time while they worked. Almost like W-2, right? Like not for active time, not for like if you were on the platform, you were getting paid. Last week, they laid off every employee driver. They don't offer that anymore. And they said they would allow all of the drivers to remain as independent contractors. So basically, Revel they decided to start a company and be the opposite of Uber and Lyft, almost like an Alto or something, or Alto. And so they were going to be the opposite. And now they're like, well, let's just be Uber and Lyft. And they laid everybody off. So again, it showed me, and there's a lot to that story. You guys can look it up. Just look up Revel Rideshare, Google it. You'll find a story on it immediately that will give you any details you want, because to me, it was just a big deal. They're one of these ones who said, you guys need to be employees. Well, every time we see one of these, they fail. Even Alto is really struggling, and yeah. So here we go. This is what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I'm going to kind of put together what I did in 13 minutes of gig news this week on YouTube. For those that haven't seen it, or even if you have, I'm just going to run through this real quick. Then I'm going to leave us at a point where next week we will be ready for Stephanie Vigil, because it's important. So we're going to talk about gig legislation here. California, New York, Washington State, and Minnesota all have become like a similar style. The Prop 22 we talked about earlier in this episode, the Minnesota way is kind of based on Prop 22. New York City and Seattle to pull those two cities because they're the main points of those two states. The way that they work is just crazy too, like those minimum wages and active time. And it's just all, I mean, if you ask people in any of those cities, it's just hurt the drivers. And again, the customers, the restaurants, all, it's like everybody gets it taken out on them. It's amazing to me that there's a business model. I grew up in a different time, I guess, because the business model that said, hey, I need some investors. You want in on this? What are you doing? Well, we're going to screw over the customers. We're going to screw over the drivers, and we're going to screw over the restaurants that are helping us. But we're going to make some money. I mean, it doesn't even, it makes, I mean, I know I just put it bluntly, but that is what's happening. So if you had like tried to sell, I don't know who you'd get to invest. Again, for many years, it was just these kind of fake projects, flying cars, fully autonomous by 2020. I meant 2022. I meant 2024. Never mind, we've sold all of our autonomous. I think that was all to kind of get the ball. We're like, we're, you know, for years, I was a partner driver since 2015 with Uber. In 2019, that ended. Or 2018, they took out the word partner. You were just a independent contractor driver. And they had, you know, they were a tech company forever. Now they're just a simple dispatch company. I'm talking about Uber and DoorDash and those. There are still very good tech companies trying good things out there. So even in the gig space. But that style has proven not to work. It proved it at California, and all these others kind of launched based on that. Florida and New Jersey have a different thing, a different style. They're taking the menu of every restaurant and saying across the board, Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash, whatever, you all have to use the menu items and prices as they are listed in the restaurants in your apps. And we all know they charge 15 to 25+% item markup per item off the, if you go into the restaurant prices. So that they're trying to make it across the board that the apps have to do this. So if I go to Uber Eats, I better see a $7 hamburger from a place I like that's $7 at the place. I better see it for $7. And then if I go to DoorDash, I better see it for $7 too. They can then add whatever fees they want, but I need to see it at the restaurant level. The problem here is, because again, it's going towards transparency, but it's not quite there because we know the platforms will immediately, I mean, they've done it in Seattle. They're going to do it in Minnesota. They're just going to add a line item that says $5 restaurant law fee or whatever they're going to say. But then they're also going to, if you think about this, guys, they're going to take it out on the restaurants because the restaurants, most of them are aware of how this works because that's usually part of the deal. Like if you want to be on DoorDash or Uber Eats, you can make it so that the service doesn't cost you if you allow them to mark up the items. Otherwise, they got to come in and say, well, you got to pay us 50 grand a month or 20 grand a month. And it might not become that affordable. But the other way is like, hey, let us just mark up some items pretty bad and then add our fees and everything so it looks higher in the menu and we can make up some of that ground there. And I think that has been way more appealing since the pandemic, but this is going to make that problem. And somehow there's still, here's the thing. I honestly believe that somehow they're still going to make everybody suffer. Customer, restaurant, driver. I don't know how they get away with it. But I mean, some people are wising up, some aren't. Last week in Colorado, and we'll wait to tell the whole story next week, but if you guys remember last summer, we did a town hall. Stephanie Vigil, who was a newly appointed House of Representatives member, who was a gig worker prior to that doing delivery, had no political background. She was elected to the Colorado House of Representatives. Her original bill, SB 23098, needed the backing of a Senator Kevin Priola. We invited Senator Priola to come to the town hall that we had last year. He said he didn't think he'd be able to make it. She asked him a couple times. I wrote him like 3 times. We had other people trying to lead him our way. He did show up. He did come over to the mic and he said, I'm just here to learn and listen today. What he expected to walk into was a bunch of drivers saying, we want to be union. We want to be W-2. We want, because in every state, all these states, California, Seattle, or Minnesota, that what they're doing is you're seeing 15, 20 people rallying around this and showing up for the events, or 25, 30 maybe these days, but, and who all want W-2 and unions, but who isn't there? the people who want to stay independent, the 95% of the people who work in this that want the independence and flexibility and everything that comes with it. So when he arrived, he was shocked to see more people than in any other states groups trying to push it, even the union type ones and whatever. He walks in, he's thinking, oh God, this is a union event, to realize none of us in there was 60, 70 plus between the two rooms. And he talked with many people. He learned that none of us wanted to be W-2 or in unions, and why a lot of us with our own reasons like, we shouldn't have to explain it. You're allowed to be your own business, but why so many of our stories were important, like having children and trying to raise them and things most of these politicians just aren't aware of. So the bill was put through as one bill for rideshare and delivery. So there were three main things that made it so that they were trying to tweak with the bill right after the town hall, and Priola was meeting with Stephanie a little bit more, which was good. But there were 3 points they did not like. He was getting feedback, and they needed it. It was written as one bill, the one I just read you. They wanted it in 2, a rideshare and a delivery. I'm already thinking smart idea, because sometimes in a place it works for rideshare, it doesn't for delivery. So yeah, why not have them separate? That way, if one is just a mess, you can go tweak with the one, not both. 2, the gig companies were given major kickback that they weren't even willing to sit at the table, because it was pushing for the removal of an acceptance rate. Acceptance rate, as we all know, is an illegal metric to use on an independent contractor in all 50 of the states. All 50 states have language about their labor code where an independent contractor you can't have some kind of acceptance rate on how often somebody who is their own boss takes work from you. So that can't be a factor, but yet they didn't want that removed. 3, gig companies and sexual abuse advocacy groups, because they also wanted to be able to challenge a wrongful deactivation. And weren't specific in that, like what it needed to be, just the fact that you should be able to challenge it or look into it, get some answers. So the gig companies about that said, and the sexual abuse advocacy groups also demanded that driver deactivation appeals be removed. They said that it was likely to put dangerous drivers back on the platform. And I have a really hard time with this, because if somebody was accused of sexual something as a driver and you deactivated them from the platform, then they have a court date. Until that court date, sure, you keep them deactivated. It should be very easy to do that in a database. This guy was accused of something. We don't know how it stands, but regardless, he's accused. His court date is coming up. He stays deactivated. I get that. I don't even oppose it. It sucks if he didn't do it, but I understand with everything going on why this might need to be a factor. You need to have it looked at quickly. But once he is cleared, if they say, no, he did not do it in a court, or yes, he did do it, then that should be the effect. If he did do it, yeah, he's permanently off. If he didn't, he should be put back on. So, but they're saying that it would put likely dangerous drivers back on. That, to me, that means like this guy got accused of a sexual crime 2 days ago, but he's questioning the deactivation, so we're going to let him back on. Why don't you just have him in like a part of the database that says this happened, and until his court date? I mean, like, I don't know. That was very far for them to take this, and that's really reaching, in my opinion. They just didn't want it in there. Well, last week, June 5th, 2024, Colorado, Governor Jared Polis signed 2 bills into law. Both of these are Stephanie's bills that originally were SB 23098. So before I go any farther, I once again want to thank everybody who was involved in the town hall, who was there, who watched live. If you haven't watched live, watch it. It's on this channel. All kinds of things. Like anybody who helped us, who's watched the lives, who's listened to the podcast, emailed us, any people who were involved, even in just keeping the energy levels high. So you didn't have to go or whatever, but who were familiar and knew what we were doing. Thank you very much for helping, because it really did help. So here's the 2 new laws and how they work. So again, they've been separated. We'll do rideshare and then we'll do delivery. And then next week, again, guys, Stephanie Vigil will be here. These are the bills she redrafted into 2 from the 1, got Priola on board, who we needed, and got these passed into law. So rideshare. So SB 24075. 23 last year, 2023, SB Senate Bill 24, 2024. And then they have a number if you're wondering why I'm reading those. So SB 24-075, Transportation Network Transparency Bill, requires rideshare companies show drivers and passengers how much driver made and how much companies made. And for the company portion, they have to break it down into line items. So it can't just be fees and taxes. And the customer gets, here's what it's going to cost you, and the driver sees a flat fee. But at the end of every rideshare ride, a receipt is sent to the customer and to the driver, and it's the same one. And they're going to validate that this is how it's done. I mean, how they're going to do that or specifically look into some, I don't know. But so both parties, the driver and the passenger, will get a full breakdown, and they're going to have to line item everything, what their charges are, platform fee, rideshare fee, all their fees, airport fee, like anything they want, or else they can just put fees and show how high it actually is. But the one take that's going to be huge to the customers, and it will help the drivers with time, is that on every receipt, the customer will see the total they spent, $70, and then on there in the line items, they will see how much the driver made. So it will no longer be drivers saying, oh, you don't understand, we don't get that much, and them thinking they're just trying to shake them down for a tip. It's going to be $70, your driver made 13. Now on the other side, they need to show where the other $57 went. I mean, they're going to have a hard time doing this. So also, the drivers are shown complete transparency of pickup, drop off, distance to pickup, and the complete pay, no joking around. They get to see it all. And we've called it up front before, but this is a little bit different than up front because it has to be right. Last, driver deactivations. The language in the bill says that the state will certify a driver support organization. This is something I want to talk to Stephanie about next week, because in the old language, it was the state will have a driver group that you could apply your deactivations to, but the state doesn't have that kind of financing and time to do that kind of thing. But if it hadn't said the state will certify, I would think this is a union. But the fact that the state will certify a driver support organization, hopefully it will just be drivers, and people who that were wrongfully deactivated can be looked at. And again, this will be done on levels too. So don't think that like every driver deactivated can all of a sudden go into a lawsuit with these companies. You have to pass like different levels. Like level 1 would be like, okay, what is your reason? Here's why you were deactivated. And then you would respond and say, I didn't do that, or that didn't happen. And then they would go back and they would even have to determine if that's enough to get your deactivation up to level 2 or 3 or 4. So it's really done almost compartmentalized, but not in a sketchy way. It's done so that you're not wasting, so that every single person's not wasting state taxpayer money and whatnot. But it's a good thing to have in place. And this, by the way, is so unique and different. And Stephanie and I have talked about all this many times. You know, I feel like I helped with some of this because a lot of her was very hard the other way. But I kept saying transparency, transparency, transparency. And she's like, if that's all we could have, you'd be fine with that. I'm like, if there's no acceptance rate, transparency, 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 because then I can make my own decisions. Companies are allowed to run themselves into the ground. Company wants to charge 1 cent per rideshare ride. They have every right to do that. And then they can put out the offers and say, we're not willing to pay you on these rides, and see how many people take it. But they'll be out of business in 48 hours. So, but companies do have the right to do what they want, but they don't have the right to not be transparent with independent contractors. So now let's move on to delivery. HB 24-1129, House Bill 24-1129, Protection for Delivery Network Company Drivers Bill. I know it's a weird long name. Requires delivery companies show drivers and customers how much driver made and how much companies made broke into line items, same as we just talked about above with rideshare. All delivery drivers on all platforms will be given 60 seconds to decide if they want to accept the order. Some people might be saying, well, that's not that big of a deal because it used to be 60 seconds or whatever it was. Now it's 30 or now, I don't know, 30 is enough, or it's not just about how long you get to see it. 60 seconds is a good idea anyway, because it gives, in case you're driving or whatever, multi-apping. But not only that, it makes it so that, and I hate to say it this way, but it makes it so that the food delivery apps are going to have to be a little careful about their pricing, because every driver will see that offer for 60 seconds, laughing at a $2 offer or something. So if they know that it takes like 4 drivers in to take a $2-3 order, they're going to try and make it a $3, or, this is my thought anyway, a little more of an order to try and get the first or second person to bite. Data's getting expensive, and now that they have to wait 60 seconds per person, that's going to, this is all timing. They want it doesn't happen, but they want the first driver to see an offer to take it every time and to get moving. So, delivery apps must also provide an internal challenge deactivation button in each of the apps. So this is where you still get the chance to do the deactivation process, as I was talking about above, but this is a little bit different. So like if you're deactivated from DoorDash, like let's say some people even get deactivated, they open the app and they find out, right? And you're like, oh my God, why? And like then you're emailing and it takes weeks, and maybe you don't even find out why. Maybe you never get reactivated. Nova Dasher, our friend Marco, he was, he had over 20,000 deliveries at the time he was deactivated, and didn't even know why, couldn't get answers, was emailing for weeks, maybe a month, and then kind of stopped. And about another month and a half later was just reactivated out of nowhere. Like this is ridiculous. So now though, if you're deactivated on DoorDash, let's say, you would open the DoorDash app and it wouldn't just be not available to you. And what happened? And then you check your email and you've been deactivated. But instead, it won't show you the normal DoorDash app. It will just show you your account was deactivated. Do you want to challenge? And a button. And if you just push it, it goes to the level 1 for challenging, because they know that the delivery game has been really actively skirt tailing the laws of what would be acceptable for deactivations. But with that said, you guys, that's everything. It would be the same driver support organization that would review if it gets that high. But yeah, next week, Stephanie Vigil will be on the podcast. It's going to be awesome. We're going to get into all these details. So leave comments, send me emails, Steve at Rideshare Rodeo. And yeah, be safe, you guys. Earn smart and be good to each other. We'll see you back here next week on Rodeo. Peace.
She was just a baby.